study of the parables of Jesus. Lesson 6. The parable of the weeds. This is found in Matthew 13, verses 34 through 24 through 30. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling up the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds. First collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." These 4 parables are called doublets. This means that the first pair are to be studied together, and likewise the second pair. The parable of the weeds. You're probably more familiar with this parable being called the parable of the tares. However, the word tares is not in our modern vocabulary, and the word weeds is. The word tares describes a weed that has heads which look like those of wheat. While this parable has some characteristics of an allegory, it is far more like a simple comparison than is the parable of the sower. The symbolism of the weeds. Now remember what a symbol is. The kingdom of heaven is like the plot of the whole story. It is not just that you plant the seed and that means something, and the seeds grow and that means something, and then they come up together and that means... No, it is just the plot itself, the storyline. The kingdom of heaven is like that. That is, the seed, the word, the message concerning the kingdom is preached, and it grows as God gives it growth. But the evil one, Satan, the devil, Beelzebub, whatever you want to call it, comes and sows something that looks like wheat, looks like members of the kingdom, but isn't. One who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. This phrase is Jesus' self-designation. However, by inclusion or extension, it includes present-day proclamation of the message concerning the kingdom. This is true because Jesus is present with those who teach until the end of this age. Matthew 28:20, my translation. The good seeds are the sons of the kingdom. Matthew 13:38, my translation. The weeds are the sons of the evil one. Now, this is important. This is, again, my translation. The harvest is the end of this present age. Now, this is important because this means that the sons of God and the sons of the evil one will be intermixed together in the kingdom. Now that's important. This is not the kingdom and the world. This is the kingdom. That means that all those who profess to be submissive to the will of God in the kingdom are not. It means that some are some of the time and some of the time they aren't. It means that all kinds of mixtures. Now, the tendency in many conservative believing churches is to draw lines of separation, draw boundaries and say, you're in and you are out. I was raised in a tradition that was notorious for doing that. And I suspect many of you were raised in a traditional church that did that. This parable teaches absolutely against doing that. The harvesters are the angels who will gather out of the kingdom everything that causes sin and those who practice evil. Again, my translation. The fiery furnace is the final destruction of Satan and those who follow him. See Revelation 20, verses 10, 14, and 15. Someday, maybe I'll teach a lesson on that, but not today. The overall meaning of this parable. Since this is not an allegory, the storyline, plot, as a whole imparts its meaning. The plot is this, summarized. The Son of Man, working through his followers, proclaims the message concerning the kingdom of heaven throughout the whole of this present age, which Matthew makes sure we understand in the last verse of his gospel. This proclamation produces people who are active in the kingdom. At the same time, the devil, working through his followers, is proclaiming his false message, which produces a people so closely related to those in the kingdom that to destroy one is to destroy the other. For example, mothers and children. You couldn't eliminate one of those from the kingdom without doing serious and perhaps fatal harm to the others. Our husbands and wives, again, the same thing. Business partners. But even more than that, think of those who live in small villages or worship in small churches. The interrelationship between them is such that to eliminate one would be to eliminate the others. I think of even soldiers in small military units. I know of no military unit of any size that doesn't have some awful people in it. And if they were all believers, you would harm the good soldiers if you eliminated the bad ones. Think about your own situation and see if that's not true. Now, the parable of the net, Matthew 47 through 50. Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping, gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all these things? Jesus asked. Yes, he replied. He said to them, therefore, every teacher of the law who has been instructed about the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old. The only difference between this parable and the previous one is the absence of detail in this one. This probably allows us to see the meaning more clearly. Also note the phrase, once again. I am sure that this is Matthew's way of introducing like material. Maybe that's what makes me think of it as a doublet. The meaning is that good and evil will coexist throughout the present age. While God reserves the right to protect and even avenge his people during that time, the major separation will occur only at the last judgment. And that is the variation, parable of the net, where it varies slightly from the one of the weeds. I also think that these two parables are examples of a parable directed at one of the Jewish groups which existed in the first century. I believe it is directed toward the Zealots. These were people who later led the revolt against Rome in 66 through 70 AD that led to the destruction of the nation of Israel. Jesus even had one of his apostles was a zealot. He was named as Simon the Zealot. This is a warning that in our zeal for righteousness, we can very easily go too far. I could quote you 1,000 examples from the present day. There are people in their zeal to eliminate the ravages of homosexuality that go around harming, damaging people who would not think about committing homosexual acts. God hates such people. Now, I'll probably get a lot of feedback on that one, but people always say, well, God hates the sin but loves the sinner. That's not what the prophet says. One of the things that he says is, there are 6 things that God hates, yea, 7 he abominates. And one of them are people who shed innocent blood. That's people, folks, people. Zeal is a dangerous thing because remember what Paul said about the Jews of his day. They have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. Now, how do you make these parables your own? First of all, you consciously and prayerfully calm your zeal down and don't try to make every group of people in your spiritual life conform to what you think the standards should be. To ask God to forgive you if you do mark other people in gossip or on the internet, especially on the social media. That's one that Jesus at that time would not even have thought about. And do your dead level best not to mark them, but to change them. And you ought to remember the picture of the angels of Christ at the last days, carefully taking each stalk of wheat and each stalk of weed and placing them in totally different places. Or a group of fishermen with a big seine open up, carefully throwing away the trash fish and carefully conserving the good fish. We really need to take the teaching of these two parables to heart and change the way we think and especially the way we behave. Thank you.